From Illinois, Mr. Schneider.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And let me start with the obvious. Everyone on this committee is outraged at the rampant fraud experienced during the pandemic. American taxpayers, including, as was touched on, those who relied on the program, stood up by this Congress, and by the way, stood up unanimously by Republicans and Democrats together, were victimized by deceitful individuals and organized criminal groups. No one's defending it. We all agree that we should be doing everything possible to recover the money stolen and prosecute those who stole the money to the full extent of the law. We also need to make sure that going forward we're better at defending against fraud, from program design to system development, supporting the programs, and deterring those inclined to consider stealing from taxpayers with greater prosecution and enhanced recovery. And let's review the facts. 3 years ago, our nation faced an unprecedented health and economic crisis. In February of that year, we sat in this very room with Secretary Azar. I'd venture to say that no one sitting here had any idea of the devastating impact the pandemic would have. We had a much better view a month later when we came back to D.C. and passed the CARES Act, bipartisan, unanimous. And then 20 million people lost their jobs. Unemployment reached nearly 15%, and it's the highest rate since the Great Depression, and there was no end in sight. Now let's consider what would have happened if Congress had not acted. Maybe another Great Depression. The loss not just of individual businesses, but of entire industries, and millions of people out of work with no prospect of finding a new job. Rising poverty across the country and negative economic and social impact lasting for generations. So some like charts, I love analogies. We had a 5-alarm fire raging out of control. We were trying to put that fire out with water passed in buckets as fast as possible. And the buckets had holes. Speed mattered, as we've discussed, which meant that there was a trade-off between trying to fix the holes and precisely passing the buckets so no water spilt, and getting the water as quickly and effectively as possible to the fire lines. And unfortunately, that would mean not getting 100% of the water to the flames. Does anyone here want to claim we failed at our primary goal of putting out the fire? Are you asserting that the millions of Americans out of work at the time and otherwise unable to feed their families or keep roofs over their heads didn't receive desperately needed assistance? Is anyone arguing that we should not have stood up these programs? Last month, this economy created more than 500,000 jobs, 12 million jobs just in the past 2 years, and employment, as also has been noted today, is at its lowest rate in 54 years. So my questions to our panel: as we've discussed today, the breadth and sophistication of the many unemployment insurance fraud schemes and the ongoing efforts to pursue criminals and reclaim the monies, and with an eye towards making sure that we're better prepared if we face a similar crisis, what should have or could have Congress and the Trump administration done in 2020 to better protect against fraudulent claims, and what should we be doing now? And I'll start with you, Mr. Dodaro.
Yes. First, the legislation that Congress passed in 2016 was to get agencies prepared to prevent fraud. That needs to be effectively implemented. It's still not effectively implemented at the Labor Department or at the Small Business Administration and others. So we're slightly better prepared than we were before, but we're not fully prepared for the next emergency. So that, to use your analogy, that we save. The fire doesn't do as much damage as it does before we put it out. All right? And so, secondly, there needs to be more oversight by the Congress to make sure agencies put these anti-fraud prevention measures in place and deal with improper payments. Since 2003, when agencies have been required to report improper payments, there's been $2.4 trillion in improper payments. This is a problem that's pervasive across the government. Last year, 86 programs, 16 different agencies. More attention needs to be put on these two matters.
Great. Thank you. Mr. Turner.
For us, I would say data access. Labor OIG had data access from the start. Instead of having to wait 5 or 6 months to get it, we would have been able to move out and identify some of these issues a lot earlier. So for us, that would be the key. And although the department has gotten better with that, they are assisting us, but it's a temporary solution that we have in place right now. And so we hope that we can get something more permanent, but we would hate to resort back to IG subpoenas.
Mr. Horowitz.
IT modernization, what Mr. Dodaro said on that. transparency, greater transparency into data. Justice Brandeis famously said, sunlight is the best of disinfectants. Get that information out. We need it. The IG needs it. And third, data analytics, ability to cross-match data. One person shouldn't be able to take their Social Security number to 40-plus states to get benefits.
Thank you. And if I can quote my friend, Mr. Kelly, we shouldn't be pointing fingers. Let's find a way to work together, solve this problem, make sure we don't face a crisis like this again. I yield back.
Thank you, Representative. Want to highlight again the purpose of this hearing is to investigate the size and scope of fraud in the federal unemployment program, which more than doubled in the last few years during the pandemic. The purpose is to investigate fraud. I'd like to